Welcome to Navajo County Connection. I'm your host, Jason Whiting, Navajo County Supervisor for District 3, and we're excited to have you here today with us. Today we have a special guest on our show, a co-worker of mine, somebody I've become close friends with and have really grown to value and appreciate your expertise, Pascal. We have Pascal Berlioux, who works for the Eastern Counties Association. Pascal, if you don't mind, I know who you are, I know a lot about you, but our viewers don't. If you don't mind giving us a little bit about your background and what brought you here to Arizona.
All right, well, good afternoon, Jason. Thank you for having me here. It's not going to come as a surprise after just a few sentences that I say that I come from the other side of a big pond. Was born in France, raised in France, son of a military family. My dad had a very close connection with the American military forces in Europe. He was a general in the French military in heavy armor, worked a lot with the US Army out there, and always instilled in me a very deep connection with the United States, a lot of respect and deep admiration actually for what the US were doing in Europe, essentially protecting us. I mean, we are talking about, the 50s, 60s, when the possibility of a new war with the Soviet Union was a reality. So I grew up in this culture, looking up toward the US, and when I became an adult, I was really interested in coming to the US, and when I had the opportunity to do so, I did. Came to the US about 30 years ago. I'm now, of course, a proud American citizen. The family, all the kids were born in the US. One of our sons is a US Marine serving in Okinawa right now, and been very, very happy for about 30 years now in the US.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your son's service. I know you have a deep, rich history in service to country, and I've always admired your appreciation for service to country and your appreciation for America and your desire to come here. So you came to America and you were able to come here finally and raise your family here. What brought you here in the way of industries, and what did you get involved with as you were here?
Yeah, so I started life in the military myself. I graduated from the French equivalent to West Point Special Military Academy, and I did serve for a number of years in the French military, special forces, commandos, and moved to industry. I came to the US to open the subsidiary of a French electronics company. Created my own company on the East Coast, ran it for 10 years or so, sold it to a fairly large company named Perkin-Elmer. My company became the basis of their optoelectronics company, and then, in the early year 2000, it was time to ship all of the hardware manufacturing to Asia. We had an opportunity to move to Asia, but the 5 kids were at every stage in the American schooling system, and we were very happy here. So we decided to stay, and it was time, to move west. We'd been on the East Coast for a number of years. Political correctness in Connecticut was fairly heavy, shall we say. So we were very interested in discovering the West, and we decided to make the move. And we showed up in 2002, the year of the rodeo Chediski fire, and it was a dual cultural shock, I would say. There's probably more difference between Arizona and New York than there is between New York and Paris. So that was the first cultural shock. And the second cultural shock, honestly, and the reason why I decided to go back to my roots of the wood industry after the academy, is this experience with the rodeo jet ski and the incredible damage that this kind of event were wreaking on the land.
Which was obviously devastating to this area. I've been born and raised in this area, and at the time I was in college and remember coming home to check on family and having to go the long way to get here just because of the road closures and the things that were going on. And obviously we've had the wall of fire since and some other things, but you became heavily involved in a project that many people know something about in this area, but it's called Forfry. And in fact, I would say you were one of the architects, original architects of Forfry. How did you get involved in that?
So when I left the military in France, I went to work for a French group, which was a wood engineering product group. We were essentially designing plants in France. We operated one technology demonstrator for each of the various wood technologies we were offering to the market. And we were building plants in Africa and in Asia. So we had a particle board plant, and I became a production manager in that particle board plant. We had 2 wood furniture plants. I was engineering manager for these plants. And we built the first OSB type of plant in Europe, and I was project manager then. I was plant manager for that plant, and that was before I came to the US. And when we came to Arizona, 2002, rodeo jet ski was a complete shock for me. We're coming, the family comes from the French Alps. We are very close to nature, hiking, climbing, skiing, hunting, fly fishing, motorcycle riding, you name it. We are very, very close to nature. And I was expecting that something major would happen immediately after that fire, like a very strong reaction as to let's make sure that that does not happen again. And 2002 went by, a lot of talking. 2003 went by, a lot of talking, a lot of meetings. 2004, more meetings, more collaborative setting, discussion and stuff like that. And clearly, we had the need for something to happen. We had the need for, execution to start a following discussion. And that's what I've always been interested in, professionally speaking. So a couple of friends and mine essentially decided to put our money where the discussion was, and we created a company called Arizona Forest Restoration Product, AZFRP, and we started working with local government, worked a lot with David Tenney right here in Navajo County. We also worked a lot with the Forest Service. We worked a lot with state forestry. We worked a lot with the environmental community to essentially put that project together that became Forfry. Yes, absolutely.
So Forfry was something that had not been really seen before. Again, it's the largest landscape scale restoration project in U.S. Forest Service history. That's no small task that was undertaken. Clearly, you were able to work with local government, state government, federal government, many of the stakeholders throughout the state, including the environmental groups, in coming together to get consensus on a way forward that we couldn't have a rodeo Chetaskai or a wall of fire again. And the solution that came forward from that, in essence, was Forfry.
Yes.
And so Forfry was able to come out of that. What's different about Forfry than your traditional, and why was it necessary to have such a large-scale contract here in the state of Arizona?
So there's a couple of core principles that helped create for Fry and that are currently helping running for Fry. The first principle, is that when you have a problem, catastrophic fire, which are operating at the 500,000 acre scale, is always useful to have, your classic small project around town, clearing 500 acres here, 600 acres there, maybe 2,000 acres here with the fire department. But the core principle number one is that if you have a disturbance that operates at 500,000 acre scale, you have to operate a solution at 500,000 acre scale. You need to match the scale of the solution to the scale of the problem. So the first core principle was to say, you know what, guys, we need to shift the discussion from 3,000 acre or 10,000 acre to 500,000 acre in terms of solution and restoration, because that's the type of scale we're dealing with. And the Wallow fire, again, was a 500,000 acre fire. So clearly, operating at landscape scale to deal with a landscape scale issue was the very first core principle. The second core principle that was critically important to a few of us, and this is where I would say we really established that connection with local government on one hand, Apache County, Gila County, Greenlee County, Navajo County, and again Supervisor Tenney being a leader on this front before he left for state government. And you know that well because you have essentially been leading that entire effort on the county side since he's left. So with the county on one hand, with the environmental constitution, on the other hand, Grand Canyon Trust, Center for Biodiversity, we all came to that realization that we were targeting an issue that was too big for the classic financial system of, agency funding. We came to the realization very soon that essentially it costs $1,000 to restore 1 acre in northern Arizona. We had a 1 million acre problem on our hand. If you look at the entire ring, Mogollon Rim, well, $1,000 per acre times 1 million acre is going to cost you $1 billion, billion with a B here, to fix the issue. And that money simply was not going to come from Phoenix. That money was not going to come from Washington. We had to find a new model where essentially restoration would pay for itself. And that meant that we had to find a new model where industry would be welcomed back by the local communities. It would be welcomed back by the environmental community as the tool to essentially implement restoration. So Fort Fry was unique because it was the largest project in the nation. And it was unique because it was the first project that really looked at landscape scale. We aimed at 1 million acres of restoration. And it was unique in as much as from the get-go there was this realization by a few core constituents that we have no other choice than to develop an industry-funded model if we wanted to scale up. Because any other model based on taxpayer, any other model based on government subsidy cannot scale up to 1 million acres. So that was one of the very core principles. And obviously the last core principle is that if we wanted the work to actually take place, we could not be tied up in court for the next 30 years. So we had to design a system where nobody would be a big winner. Nobody would get everything, 100% of what they wanted. But on the other hand, everybody would get enough that we could have this area of agreement and we could work together. So the core issue here was to get to a point where, you know what, let's make sure everybody on the table gets 90% of what they want. Let's all agree that we're going to give up 10% of what we dream of, but that 90% for all of us is worth doing.
Well, it was a brilliant strategy, Pascal. We're going to end this first segment here shortly and come back to our viewers here in a moment. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about where you're at today with ECO, some of the accomplishments of ECO, your transition to ECO, and what's going on today in the Forest Service. But again, congratulations on the efforts there that were done. My predecessor, obviously, who'd been involved in this with David Tenney, yourself, and many others, who had the vision to see the need to bring industry back into the area. And I find it very unique that at the same side of the table we have the environmental groups and the loggers arm in arm fighting to get back in and being able to restore our forests to what they could and should be.
Exactly, and you're making a very important point, which is that it is no one's personal and unique vision, certainly not mine. It has been teamwork all along. There's been a number of key players who have worked together, and really we should have half a dozen people around this table because that's how it happened.
Perfect. When we come back, we'll be talking about Eastern Counties Association and what's going on today in forest restoration. Thanks, Pascal. We appreciate this first part. Welcome back to Navajo County Connection. We're glad to be back with you again here. Hopefully you enjoyed the first half of this segment. I certainly did. I've always appreciated the opportunity to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart, with my family being involved in the timber industry, with the Whitings coming here originally, and now getting to be back involved and trying to help where I can in Arizona's forest. And we again have Pascal with us. And Pascal, we talked in the first half of this segment about Forfry and the beginnings of it and it getting up and started, and they awarded a contractor and they started to move down that path. And from that point, you came to the Eastern Counties Organization. Tell us about the move to the Eastern Counties Organization and why you decided to go there.
We'll be happy to do that, but first we need to fix something here. You're definitely way too modest when you say, just trying to contribute and so on. I mean, I think that our viewers here need to realize that you have been actually really at the forefront of the leadership in that effort for the last 4 years, and I just want to use the opportunity to say that it is deeply, deeply appreciated, and you are making a difference.
Well, I sincerely appreciate that. Thank you.
So ECO, Eastern Arizona Counties, that was an interesting transition. Essentially what took place is that when you move things, you're going to please a lot of people. And sometimes there's a couple of people who are not going to be so pleased. And sometimes some administrations are going to feel maybe a little unpleased at moving things forward and maybe moving things too fast for them and so on and so on. So to make a long story short, when the Forest Restoration Initiative, the Forfry, finally produced a long-term contract in 2012. Of course, my company bid on it, but the Forest Service, in its immense wisdom, decided to award the contract to somebody else. And of course, it's not the purpose of today's discussion, but I think everybody has been aware of the tremendous upheavals that we've seen through that contract awarding for the last couple of years. I mean, it's been a little bit of a show in itself. So at that time, essentially, I decided to fold my company. It served no purpose anymore. Forfry existed, which was a big win. And we were all hoping that somehow the contractor would succeed. And at which time, David Tenney essentially really came to see me and said, look, We've worked very well together for the last couple of years, putting forthright together. You have created a lot of relationship with a lot of people. How about coming and continuing that work, but continuing on behalf of the counties? And I thought it was a very nice offer, and it was a very interesting offer, and I decided to accept. So I became the executive director for the Eastern Arizona Counties Organization, ECO. ECO regroups 6 counties, Navajo County, of course, Apache, Gila, Graham, Greenlee, and Cochise. So it's about a little less than half of the state, the eastern states. And these are essentially rural counties. Each of them have individually a small voice when it comes to dealing with the federal partner or the state partners. But when all of the 6 counties essentially work together, they create political mass. And ECO as an organization representing 6 counties has a voice with the feds and with the states that each county individually could not have. So that's the rationale behind ECO. And that is a job that I've been doing for the last 6 years, essentially working on behalf of these 6 counties, mostly on natural resource issues.
Well, I appreciate the work that you've done there. I noticed that I know David Tenney, my predecessor at ECO. I represent Navajo County now on the board of ECO, and so David used to represent Navajo County there, and he used to always tell me when nobody's worried about who gets the credit, a lot more of the work gets done. And I've seen that be the case with these counties. It really has, to your point, the unity that exists, the powerfulness of the voices as we come together and align on an issue is able to try and push or propel some of these issues forward that are important to the citizens that we represent. And so it's become something, a vehicle and an opportunity for me to be able to try and truly serve the people that I represent here in Navajo County. So I've appreciated the opportunity to be a part of the ECO organization, and I've appreciated your leadership as executive director there. Over the course of the last 4 years, there's been some significant work that you and I have been able to get done together.
Yes.
As we've worked, and specifically, there's a number of issues that we work on outside of forestry. Do you mind touching on just very briefly some of those issues that we work on in general each year that we try and work on, but then we're going to come back and talk specifically about the forestry issues because that's what we're talking about today.
Yes, so we've been dealing, and quite specifically you have been dealing because you are the vice chair of ECO, and you have been designated by the ECO board as the lead supervisor in forestry issues. So you have definitely worked a lot on a lot of forestry issues, but we do work on a lot of issues which are not intuitively forest related, although everything comes together. We are working a lot on watershed issues. It is obviously critically important. You know, the image is that Arizona is about fire and water. So definitely when you talk about forestry and watershed, you talk about fire and water, so it's very important. We have been working a lot on mining, making sure that this economic engine continues to drive our communities' economic wealth. We've been working a lot in terms of grazing and ranching. We are probably, we ECO, Eastern Arizona counties, we are probably the voice of the ranchers with the Cattle Growers Association when it comes to trying to keep under control the reintroduction of predators such as you know, the Mexican wolves, the jaguar, and so on and so on. It's part of a role which is not always very easy, where we are essentially acting as an accountability mechanism for the federal Fish and Wildlife Service. And of course, we spend a lot of time on forestry. I mean, you have led what we call the Bridge the Gap program to essentially double the size of the wood industry here in the White Mountain over the last 4 years. We used to treat about 7,000 acres per year, and we are now treating 15,000 acres per year. And you know that program inside and out because you have been leading it. We are working on the planning side of the forest restoration project, the next phase of Forthright, coming right here in Navajo County, is right now going through the NEPA process, the analysis process. We are leading that effort. I happen to serve as the chair of the planning work group for Forthright. I also happen to serve as you serve as a co-chair for the Forthright stakeholder group. So yes, we're involved in a lot of different things.
A recent development, and thank you for touching on some of those, because that talks about some of what's going on currently as it relates to forest.
Indeed.
I got a phone call even this morning from an individual complaining about some of the smoke, that the effects that it's having on their health and what's going on there. Unfortunately, sometimes that's what the Forest Service is having to do, is they're having to burn, but there are solutions that are being developed and technologies that are being developed to deal with that, where they're not having to burn in the forests. And I know that you've worked a lot with like the biomass facility and their ability to be able to burn. And then we were there recently with a bunch of legislators, and it was fascinating as they were able to show them the CO2 emissions, what you can't see coming from what they burn there. Pascal, how much are they actually burning at this point as far as in the number of acres on an annual basis out of that biomass facility located here in Navajo County?
So it's an impressive success. This facility is burning about 300,000 tons of forest waste, you know, treetop branches and so on, every year. That is the equivalent about 15,000 acres worth of restoration. And this is exactly what we're trying to do, you know. In the good old days, you know, treetops, branches, and so on were essentially piled and burned in the forest. It costs a lot of money, it produces a lot of smoke, it does not produce any value, and it releases a lot of, you know, gases and stuff like that. Converting this waste into 30 megawatt of electricity is a lot more productive, and doing that with the absolute best emission controls essentially allows us to remove the waste from the forest, burn it, but without producing the smoke. That is indeed an issue for a lot of our people.
Pascal, we're running out of time here today. I wish we had more. Really appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to you about some of the projects, what your history is, your background, some of the projects that are currently going on and what's been happening. It's been fascinating to see. I know one of the things we've talked about a lot lately is the importance of this, not just to the people here in Navajo County or over in Apache County or in Greenlee County or Gila County, Graham County, or Cochise County, which are represented by Eastern Counties Association, but to the state of Arizona as it directly relates to the watershed. And many of those cities are now donating money and contributing towards this project, recognizing the overall need for Arizona on this issue. So we certainly appreciate your leadership. We're grateful that you chose to move to the state of Arizona. We've been blessed to have you here, and it's an honor to work with you. We'll have a chance to meet with you guys again next month. We certainly appreciate you joining us here on Navajo County Connection today, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.